Habits are so powerful. Understanding and building positive habits is one of the most powerful tools you have to create this lasting or significant change.
What is up, everybody? It's Edgar Jr. Dad Central Show and Dad Central, and you are watching Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. Our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And I also want to say, subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. So whether you're listening to this or watching this, subscribe. If you already have subscribed, fantastic. But we know that there's a lot of people who watch us a lot and they haven't subscribed. What's holding you back? So just want to say subscribe wherever you are watching or listening to this. And today, Drew is here and we're going to be talking about small habits, big change, the 10-minute daily practices that transform your home. Drew, what's your thoughts on this one?
My thoughts are, you know, it's actually really powerful when you can apply these small changes. And we know that consistency is key. So when it's small, it seems doable. Just like my coach used to say, what if we could just get 1% better every single day? How much better would we collectively be by the end of the season? So I think 1% is doable. So let's use that as a call to action today.
Yeah, so before we get into it, a few things. We want to acknowledge the dad reality that exhaustion, emotional reactivity, feeling like you're always having to be on. And then we want to look at reframing the problem. It's not a discipline issue, it's a system and nervous system issue. And then we want to say, and we'll reinforce throughout this conversation, small habits plus regulated dad equals big family change. So we're going to look at three areas: the power of small habits, the nervous system regulation equals home leadership. And then finally, the Dad Central 10-minute daily system. So, Drew, let's kick it off with our first area, the power of small habits. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Habits, if you've read anything from James Clear, it'd be powerful stuff. There's also a great TED talk by BJ Fogg. He was a Stanford researcher. His talk is titled Tiny Habits, and it's really helping you make simple changes, but connecting them to an existing habit. And so there's some really cool research on habits that I think is important if you're not aware of it. Um, my my comments are is that habits are so powerful, but like 95% of our habits are almost subconscious. They just happen without thinking about it. So when we talk about being an intentional dad, understanding and building positive habits is one of the most powerful tools you have to create this lasting or significant change. And that's part of this whole month's theme of breaking cycles. But the reality is it's actually very doable if you focus on building one positive habit at a time. That's very doable. Back to my 1% better example. So, and if you take some of the information from these habits experts like James Clear, the reality is that habits don't fail. What happens is our systems that help us sustain the habits do. And so we talked in our last episode about this idea of shifting from behavior based change to identity based change and creating an identity of the father we're becoming. And so that's when you begin doing things like that, you're going to be more successful at helping sustain habits. And so there's four habit principles that we'd like you to apply from James Clear to fatherhood. Number one, make the habit obvious. So, and this is also connected to PJ Fogg, is you want to tie a new habit to some of your existing routines, whether it be after work, whether it be a bedtime routine, or whether it be how you start your day. And if you've heard of Hal Elrod, he's got a great book called The Miracle Morning. Spawned a whole series of things around the Miracle Morning. Anyways, I'm not going to go into that, but wherever it is that you have existing habits, you want to make your new habit obvious and attached to that. Make it easy, 10 minutes maximum. Okay. Make it attractive. So create an immediate emotional payoff. And so the reality is some of these emotional payoffs you need to recognize, when you do these habits, you're going to create a calmer home or you're going to create better connection. And finally, make it satisfying. So make it some quick wins and have some visible impact. I'm going to give an example of, let's just say you want to be more patient. Your new habit might be, I'm going to take 10 slow breaths before I walk into the house after my day. Or it might be you start your morning. I'm going to start my morning before I go out and interact with anyone. I'm going to take 10 slow breaths before walking out of the bedroom. Okay. Simple examples there. Anyways, Ed, what can you add there? Or what would you like to share on
Yeah,
top of that?
I want to add to that example, and I've used it periodically through our conversations throughout the years. I was assisting a dad in San Francisco, and he owns his own mortgage brokerage, and it's high intensity. Lots of action, go 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 go, and he would come home and just go right in the house, and it was just like craziness. And I made a suggestion to him saying, you know what? When you're leaving work, when you get into the driveway, can you take 5 minutes, just relax? Leave your day behind you of the mortgage brokerage because you don't know what you're going to get yourself into once you open up that door, and just do that. And we worked on that. And in a month's time, he said, you know what? This has become a regular ritual for me now. I make sure that before I enter the house, I take 5 minutes, I turn everything off, and I just breathe, relax. Even got into some meditation before he entered that house. So I would say, just adding on to the example you have given, you know, I'm going to use the phrase, give yourself grace. Make room in your fatherhood journey on a regular basis to give yourself grace. So that's what I would add. Anything you want to add on to that before we go on to our next topic?
That's great.
All right. Let's talk about nervous system regulation equals home leadership. We're going to break it down, folks. We're not PhDs here, but Drew's going to break it down for us. I'll help him out. So Drew, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is one of the most important elements, especially in today's world. I feel like with the screens that are constantly in our faces and the messages that we are bombarded with every day, it's often hard to keep ourselves regulated. A little bit of a side here. I was watching the John Elway documentary on Netflix, which I'm a huge Elway fan. As you can see, I'm wearing my Broncos. That's why I'm a Broncos fan. And one of the things he said in this documentary is that he didn't realize how much stress he was under through his whole period of his career. And even after, as he's left, he's reflected upon it. He's like, wow, like I never knew what it was like to not be in stress because I was always stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's a lot of dads out there who could really resonate with that. And so it's hard because you're essentially, think of it as the tachometer in your car, right? So at idle it's like 1,000 RPMs, but red line is 8,000. And so the reality is that in our lives, with the amount of stress, like that tachometer ramps up there, and it's sometimes, guess what, if you don't regulate yourself, your tachometer is staying high. And what happens if it's high and it's near the red line consistently for a long period of time? Ultimately breakdown. But also there's the effects of who's around. The car gets hotter. There's all these effects of it being higher, and all the systems around in the car actually have to work harder and harder. And that's kind of like us in our homes when we don't regulate ourselves, when we don't bring the needle back down to calm. I'll maybe reference that Elway thing later on as another example of this, but the reality is that our kids don't follow our words, they follow our own regulated presence. And so this is why it's so important. And so um, I think what we want to talk about is, how do you bring that tachometer down? How do you get down from the intense state? And you give a practical example before, and so we're going to give a couple more examples. And so there are some less than 10-minute regulation practices. We've talked about these before. We'll mention them now specifically for this to help you to have more of a regulated presence in your home for yourself as well as for your family. One is breathing. There are multiple methods, but box breathing is one where it's you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and then hold for, and again you repeat that cycle probably 3 to 5 times. There's a body-based reset. I've used this often, like going for a walk, just getting outside in nature. We know the research benefits of how powerful that is. I don't necessarily do this one or subscribe to it, but you could be splashing cold water on your face. Other people might be focused on sort of doing some form of grounding exercise. Or Ed, your example is a great one of a transition ritual between work and home, or even a transition ritual anywhere in your day where transitions are happening naturally. And so these are some 10-minute opportunities to begin helping regulate your nervous system and bringing that tachometer down a bit. And it's not only for your children, it's actually for yourself, because we know the health effects, the negative health effects of chronic stress, not only mental health, emotional health, but certainly physical health as well. Anyways, over to you, Ed, to bring this one
Yeah.
home and wrap it
So
up.
I think, and just building on what Drew was sharing there, the better you are for yourself, the better you can be for your family and your children. This is an investment into yourself so you can be better for yourself. So it can also just flow through to your family and your children. So, really important. And also, these practices must be automatic, not inspirational. So, my suggestion is pick one and start with one and build from there. And then when you feel comfortable with that one, then start reach out for another one. So that's where I would just close off that conversation piece. Finally, we're going to talk about the Dad Central 10-minute daily system. Drew, share it with our audience.
Okay, well, the power of three is proven. So we've got three specific, we'll say, buckets. Bucket one is resetting yourself. Bucket two is connection. And connection is so powerful because it's literally like connection is your like your magic wand when it comes to any form of relationship, but especially a parenting relationship. And then bucket three is helping lead the environment. And I like to have a word picture, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. And we know the difference. A thermostat sets the temperature, whereas a thermometer reacts and reads the temperature. Okay, so resetting yourself. We've talked about this breath work or any form of physical regulation. For me, exercise is a powerful one. Sometimes I need that just to clear my mind, release some of the stress and tension in my body. The whole here is you want to do something that's going to help shift you out of survival mode or out of that red line example that we talked about. Bring the tachometer back down to be a more calmer state. For some it could be music, some it could be reading, some it could be meditation, some it could be faith-based practices. Whatever it is, what do you need to do to help reset yourself? And that needs to be a consistent practice. Sometime in the day, find a way to reset yourself. Second, connect. So, I mean, connection is not that difficult when you do some simple things like making eye contact, listening, creating some form of playful interaction. I've used examples before where my son, when he was young, he really loved cars, and Tomater and his voice was something that I would break into every now and then, and it would literally shift him into like this playful. And I used it often in stressful moments, and it shifted the dynamic to be much more playful and reset both of us instead of creating more of that tension. So simple things are important in terms of connection. The goal here is, when you're interacting with your children or with your significant other, your goal isn't to fix, goal isn't to teach, to create connection. It's just creating intentional presence, and listening is and empathy are two of your most powerful tools in this. So if you need to improve your listening or improve your empathy skills, there's definitely tools that we have that can help you with that, but that's going to be the core of building connection. And finally, Ed, I'm going to transition to you to talk about bucket three, leading the environment.
Okay, well, leading, prep tomorrow, tidy one space, set the tone. You as a dad, you're the leader, right? I know that Drew is a big fan of a gentleman named John Maxwell. I know one of the things he said many, many years ago when I had a chance to chat with him for a few moments is the speed of the group is determined by the speed of the leader. So you are a leader. So if you can demonstrate calm, many times that's going to filter through the rest of the family. And also finally too, consistency beats intensity. Consistency beats intensity. Drew, you want to add on anything before we wrap up on this area about leading the environment?
Yeah, Ed, can I add in here? I think in order to lead, it does require some planning ahead. And plans don't have to be complicated or intense. They just need to be workable and thought of before the circumstances um, hit. And so, morning routines, evening routines, structure, and working collaboratively, if you're in a relationship with your wife, to make sure that there's common understanding of what the morning, evening, or these periods will look like, and you actually sit down and discuss it together. This is not the focus of the podcast in terms of working well as but that is having plans, working on it, executing and working together on delivering those plans.
All right. So as we wrap it up, the power of small habits we talked about. We also spoke about nervous system regulation equals home leadership. And then finally, the Dad Central 10-minute delay system. Sorry, the Dad Central 10-minute daily system. Sorry for that little mix up. My apologies. And some takeaways. Big family doesn't come from big overhauls, it comes from small daily systems. Also, regulating your nervous system is a leadership skill, not a self care luxury. And then finally, 10 intentional minutes a day can reshape the emotional culture of your home. So, as we close it up, want to have some encouragement here. You don't need to change everything. Your family needs a regulated, consistent you, Dad. Let me just say that again. Your family needs a regulated, consistent you. And then small habits done daily become the emotional foundation your kids build their lives on. So, as we wrap it up, Drew, is there a resource we have for our family today?
Our Fatherhood Fundamentals email course, it's a free course. You can get it at dadcentral.ca, is a great resource that we encourage you to get.
Excellent. And also, we would like to answer your questions about fatherhood during our shows. So please email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. And Drew and myself will do our absolute best to see how much you can challenge us with fatherhood questions. So as always, well, go ahead, Drew. You said, what did you?
Sure, no problem to be challenged, but ultimately our goal here is to support you, come alongside you, and help you in those periods of time that might be challenging as a dad.
100%. And there's never challenging times as a father, right, Drew? There are never challenging times, right?
Never.
So as always, thank you so much for giving the most valuable thing, your time, to us. As always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, and we'll catch you soon. Be well.